Yeah, so today there won't be a classic bootcamp lecture. It will be more about it will be more practical and more, let's say, classic towards what LauzHack usually does during the semester, doing some practical stuff. And it will be about how to make things not like a junior engineer, but more like a middle plus or senior engineer to ensure that, like, if you want to do something during your research projects, during your future internships or work, you do it properly. And if you want to do some pet projects, maybe you do something in a good way, which you can therefore put in your resume or CV and to show to HRs, and they will say like, "Wow, he's so cool, she's so cool," etc. Yeah, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is login. And let's look at the seminar notebook to understand what is meant here. Yeah, so we had this notebook on Tuesday where we trained an image classification task. We had a MNIST dataset which looked like this. We had an image of a number, and then we tried to predict this label here, like whether it is 5 or whether it's 2 here or whether it's something else. So we created a dataset with the torch vision. Then we used data loader, and we had our 3 neural networks. One was with fully connected layers, one with convolutional layers, and one was ResNet-like with these res blocks. Yeah, they looked like this. And we used cross-entropy loss and said, okay, let's do some standard training. Yeah, we take our images, we do forward step, we calculate the loss, we do backward step, we update the weights, and we are zeroing the gradients. Everything standard now. Yes, the same for evaluation. And in order to understand whether we are doing something correctly, we had to manually save all the losses from all the steps we did. So we calculated average loss here, then we return this average loss. We did the same for metrics like accuracy, and for loss here. We returned this list, we updated this list, and we had to use matplotlib to actually see how well we progress over each iteration. And it looks something like this. So let's wait for it to appear. Yeah, so we had like one plot which was with 1 point somewhere here. Then it was updated, and so on. What is the problem here? The problem is that in order to get this stuff, we need to do it manually by ourselves. Like, we need to use matplotlib, we need to figure out how to visualize this, we need to save all these logs into all these losses into a list for train, a list for val, define all these labels, titles, and also use this thing to ensure that the plot will update itself, like it will rewrite the output and not creating like many images. So, okay, we can probably do it if we have such an example. But what if we had a lot of metrics, not just accuracy for classification, but something like F1 score or ROC or some other metric? Or maybe we didn't have, wouldn't have just one type of loss, like cross-entropy loss. We would have a summation of cross entropy loss plus something else, and you'd want to have one plot for the joint loss and one for the individual losses. Then we would need to make even larger code where we would have not 1, 2 here, but let's say like three, and work with 3 plots. Okay, still manageable probably. But now we train our fully connected network, we train our convolutional network, and the only way for us to compare these 2 plots is to zoom out like this and trying to match ourselves, like where is this position here? And we see that here at the epoch number 2, we are getting around 98, here around 95, which probably means that fully connected network works worse. However, comparing it like this all the time is not easy. Like we need to match it again and again. And if we add a new neural network like ResNet again, we would need to do it again. We need to compare 3 plots, and we would need to zoom out even further. And we would have like 10 plots. They won't even fit on the same page. Do you get the issue here? I'm looking at the chat. Yeah, so what people suggesting is in the chat is called MLflow. It's one of the options. Actually, I didn't update the notebook, so it's here, I guess, the second day. I will push it back to the 5th day, but let's look at it here. I will probably need to run this code. Yeah, so it's a general thing that during training of our deep learning models, we want to understand how well it performs. We want to understand what is the quality of our model. Does it overfit on our training data, underfit, or what is happening? Should we stop training or should we continue training? Like, what are the inputs for our model? For example, we use some augmentations, like I showed you during the first day, where we had an image of a dog, and we, for example, removed the face of a dog. But maybe such an augmentation was too severe, and by removing this center, it would be impossible for the model to understand that this is actually a dog. And for us humans also, it would be impossible to understand that this is a dog. So maybe we did too severe augmentations, which actually changed the label or would make it impossible to understand that the image is still of the same class. So, and we need to somehow get a visualization of what was the input for our model. Was it with okayish augmentations or with too severe ones? Maybe also we would want to understand what are the learning rates that we do if we use a scheduler, and we would need to, again, create some other plots to log learning rate here. So all of this is complicated, and we can do it manually, but we would need to write a lot of code, which is actually the same for many pipelines, but we would need to write it again and again. And it's not a good way to spend your time, let's say. And it also makes your code way more complicated than it should be. So what engineers actually came up with is using predefined loggers, like MLflow mentioned in the chat, or TensorBoard, which is used by old school engineers, and WenDB, which is used by new engineers because it's easier and has a cool website where you can do everything easily. These loggers, they do everything for you. They allow you to create these plots and these visualizations by just running one simple line of code. And let's look how it works. So at first you would install your 1DB via pip, something like this. And then you would be able to import 1DB and do 1DB login. When you first call 1DB login, it would ask you for an API key and basically show you how to get this API key. You go to 1db.ai to this website and just register there. And this will give you an IP key that you will be able to pass here. Yeah, so it recognized me, and now we can continue working with 1DB. So we have the same train one epoch thing that we had before. But what actually changed? Now, instead of having a lot of code here to just visualize our metrics, we add a simple line here. 1db.log and a dictionary where we indicate the key, like the name of what we are logging. It can be a loss, or it can be like a learning rate. And what step are we logging? Like what iteration? Remember that we have an epoch, and for in each epoch we are iterating over data loader. So we are doing like several number of iterations. And here we indicate by saying step equal this thing. This is a loss corresponding to this specific step. To get a learning rate, we call our call get last LR method from our scheduler, and it returns the learning rate here. But well, the probably even more cooler feature is that we can log images like this. Exactly the same line, 1db.log and name of what we are logging. And then we call 1db.image. Or if it would be audio, 1db.audio, for example. And we just take our tensor and put it here. And as you'll see when I run this code, when I'm going to run this code, it's going to log everything. And we can do the same for accuracy, but for accuracy, we are just using the epoch-wise one. Any questions until now? No. Yeah, so what should we do to initialize the run with 1DB? We use so-called context manager. Basically, it's with 1db.init something. And in the new line, we call train blah, 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 as we did before, as we did here. Train something. However, one thing we need to indicate is the name of our project. So the name of our project separates our pipeline where, for example, we do image classification on MNIST with our other pipelines where we, for example, want to generate speech samples. Or like basically like here you indicate your course that you do at your university, yeah, and if you are switching from one course to another, you change this project name to something else. And name here lets you compare different settings between each other. Like, for example, when you train a fully connected network, you want to label it as run where you train fully connected network, and you call it FCNet. But if you're training convolutional network, you just say, okay, name equal convnet. And these two runs will have different names. You would understand just by name what plot are you looking at, whether you are looking at a fully connected plot or on a convolutional plot. Let's run it and see how it works. So again, we see our progress bar, but we won't see any plots here in the Jupyter notebook. You'll just see this progress bar. What's actually happening is here in 1DB, we're getting all these plots here created. And notice that we also got an example of our images here. For the train, and if we did the same for validation, we'd get for validation. We can look at our learning rate, we can look at our train loss as before, and we can change any color, we can choose any color, we can change it, and it works perfectly. Let's maybe stop this run and run convolution. Got it. Any questions? Yeah, so this run wasn't successful, so it shows nothing. We can remove it. But for this run, we can compare it easily here, and everything is shown on the same plot. So it's much easier for us to understand whether our convolutional network is converging faster than the fully connected network. Yeah, before we had to manually match points here with points here and trying to understand which of the networks works better. Now, it's much easier. Let's wait for one epoch. Yeah. Now that has the limit of how much runs we can do. So in one project you can do, I don't know if there is like a very huge limit on the number of runs. There is a limit on the memory you can use. It's 100 gigabytes as far as I remember for the free account. But other than that, as far as I know, there are no limits. Yeah, and you can see here, for example, that accuracy started from a higher position, and it's always higher than the fully connected layers, fully connected version accuracy. For both runs, you can visualize the input. And if you want to look only on one specific run, you just click on it, and there is a single plot which you can investigate here. Does login uses in inference for now? So when your model is in production, you can still use 1DB to log some results if you want to. Yeah. Where can you find the notebook? So day 5 on GitHub and day 2 on GitHub at the very end. I forgot to merge day 5 with day 2. So for 1DB, it's the end of the day 2 notebook. For everything else, is going to be a notebook in day 5. Any questions about OneDB? So basically, when you work on your project, you should use OneDB. It simplifies your life, and even you train different models, you'll have an ability to easily compare them to understand which model performs better, which converters better, etc. The only thing you need to think about is the proper naming for your run, so you understand which experiment you did for these plots. Can you somehow customize graphs like in SIB or Matplotlib? So you can you have different options. First of all, you can show several plots on the same plot by choosing Y here. You can change step to time, like in hours, in minutes. You can cut your plot to certain number of points. You can apply some smoothing to make them more smooth. And there is something else you can do, but it requires more custom lines of code. However, the good thing is if you are writing a paper, research paper, many people that just take a screenshot of 1DB and put this screenshot in their paper. So this is bad. This is like a bad way of doing it because it doesn't look pretty in a paper. So what people do for a paper, if they're like pros, let's say, they click download here and download this plot as CSV. Then they open this CSV in Matplotlib with pandas and rewrite the final plot themselves in Matplotlib. So it's okay to rewrite one plot for a paper. The problem is that when we train a model, we want to have like 20, 30 different plots. Only one of them could be potentially used in the paper, but we do not want to write Matplotlib code for all of them. And I forgot to show one thing. So in 1DB, there is a thing called the report. And this is basically like Markdown or LaTeX, where you can write like your report about your work, like my work, add some description, and you can add plots which will be visible directly in your report. You can say like add panel and choose which plot you want to include. Maybe I want to include images. I need to choose image, but it's lagging a bit. So let me choose something else. So maybe I don't want a learning rate. I want to average loss. And I want, for example, it's like this. I can choose which runs to show. Maybe I don't want to show the purple one. I want to show only the gray one. I can write text. I have commands to add like sections or to add like a screenshot, to add some equation like LaTeX or some list. Or image or something else. So this is an extremely cool feature. Like when you want to show your progress for your supervisor or for someone, or to make it available on the internet in some format where people actually can directly see your runs and see what are the exact values for your metrics. You just show them the link with your report and they can easily see what you've done. Yeah. Any questions? No. Good. So that's all regarding 1DB. Let's move to the second theme. The second thing we have for today is discussion on why Python notebooks are bad. So actually, when you start learning deep learning or machine learning, you usually start with Jupyter notebooks. Your homeworks are in Jupyter notebooks because it's easy to work with them, and you can directly see like which line doesn't work, directly fix it there. You do not need to rerun all the code to just fix one line. There are some benefits. Yeah, you can do these matplotlib visualizations and update them directly. However, when you want to write a real project, like with many models, it becomes extremely your Jupyter notebook becomes extremely inconvenient to use. Why? So let's look at this notebook here. So imagine I'm doing a classification task, but this time for audio, which is called keyword spotting. It's basically like Siri works or OK Google works, stuff like this. And the goal of our model is to understand whether I say the word Siri or I said any other word. So it's basically binary classification, where one is the target word Siri was said and zero otherwise. And imagine I am a student and I wrote everything in Jupyter notebook and it looks like this. Yeah, we have some training one epoch, train another epoch, evaluation. But we start our notebook for some reason with these lines of code. Then we import something else, import our data sets. Then, for example, we have our models. For some random reason, they're located here. And we see that the cell with models is extremely huge. It's not clear what is going on. It's very hard to understand. Then we again have a data set, but we had a data set before. Why we have different data sets? Very hard to say. Another stuff related to data sets. So you see that, like, you probably didn't understand what is going on in the notebook. And the problem is not because, like, I went through it pretty fast, but because it's structured very poorly. Why? Because it looks like a wall of code without any order, without any reason for it to be like this. Why do we have data sets, then models, then again data sets? No reason. The only reason why is because when you work with Jupyter notebooks, Jupyter doesn't care about the order of cells that you run. For example, yeah, okay, imports are important. I do imports at first. They work. But then, for example, instead of going here, at first I start with my models. Then I run the model. Something is not working. I run the data sets. So in Jupyter, the problem is that I can run any cell in any order I want. And if something breaks, I can rerun like some other cell in some random way, and it's gonna work. So in Jupyter, it's not mandatory for me to run one cell after another in the order they are written. It's not mandatory for me to run this cell, then this cell, then this cell. If I want to, I can run this cell, then something else, and only then come back here. So this potentially leads to a way of your, so it potentially leads to writing code in an ordered way, where at first you wrote your data set, then you wrote your model, then you remember that you forgot some other data set and you wrote it again. And you are jumping between your different cells because you are the author of this notebook, you know what is going on. But others, like me, like you, they look at this notebook and they completely lost. They don't understand why attention here is written next to the dataset. Why? And what's the difference between these different versions of dataset, V5, V3, etc. So this wouldn't happen if we didn't use Jupyter notebooks. But we could simplify, like we could make these Jupyter notebooks better. One way of doing it is to fix the order of cells like this, where at first we have like all the data sets, they're in correct order, everything is good. Then we have our models, okay? So potentially if we go now step by step, cell by cell, we would understand what is going on. Still, if I want to, for example, see where is like the model located, let me open it here. So it's unstructured ordered. So for example, I want to understand where is attention is located. I need to use Control F and try to find the word attention within my code. That's the only thing, as a way for me to understand where actually all the models are defined, or where the data set is defined. The only way for me is to do Control F and try to find this dataset word here. It's still not very convenient to use for non-authors. Author may know where everything is located. We, who didn't use this notebook before, do not know. So what we could do, we could add some markdown comments. So this is much better because now we see, okay, there is a dataset here, there is dataset V1, this dataset V2, etc. We may still need to use Control F to find everything, but if you are working in Google Colab or in modern Jupyter notebooks, you have this table of contents option, and you can actually jump to these markdown cells in between, which makes your life easier and your notebook much clearer. So it looks like with markdown, probably everything is readable. But it's not exactly the case. You see that we have a lot of models here. Like we have V1, we have V2, we have V3, and they're all located in the same notebook. And I need to go through all of them to actually get to like training pipelines, or if I want to change the model, I need to first do like model V2, do this stuff, then I do model V3, do this stuff, which copies the whole cell with the only modification in this line. It's non-usable, very hard to use, and especially when you have a lot of things to change. Any questions until now? No. Yeah, so the problem with the things that you need to the problem that you need to change your model or some hyperparameters actually occurs extremely often. You want to change the learning rate, you want to try different models, and if you do everything in the same notebook, this would lead to having copy-pasted cells like this one and this one with one line modification. And to long cells with long definitions of models, where everything is located in one cell or in several cells. And imagine your model is like 1,000 lines. Yeah, such models exist, like big, clever architectures. They usually require a lot of lines to just write them. So imagine you had 1,000 lines here to just define one single architecture. It will be extremely hard to go through it. So what people can come up with is using some sort of configuration. You can use something like this, where you define like your batch size in some data class. But in order for you to change it to run another model, what you would need to do is to manually save like not 3e-4, but 3e-5. Here, not 1e-5, but 1e-4, etc. And do Control S and run your code again, modify it somehow, or do like config dot learning rate, change it a bit, etc. So you would need to add extra lines of code, save it, and this would also make your notebook again larger and larger. One way you can avoid this is to use configuration files, like a JSON file where you have everything. So basically, all this stuff is written in a JSON file with this as keyword, this as value. But you would need to copy paste the whole file just to change one parameter. Like in this image here, we have our main script training with learning rate 1e-2. But if you want to train it with 1e-3 and other YDK, we would need to copy paste the whole config file. So in your repository or where you are working within your files, there are going to be a lot of almost identical files with one-line modifications. This is bad. And when you want to change them and update your config, you would upload it to your GitHub repository, for example, and you will have a lot of commits that would look like this, like update config, update config, update config, update config, etc. And all these update configs would look like this, just one-line modification. So it makes your commit history look like trash and very hard to actually understand what you did, why you did, and what modifications happen. Are models written in Jupyter notebooks used in production? No. So I'm basically explaining why people do not develop code in Jupyter notebooks when they start working on real stuff. Yeah, does everyone knows about Git and GitHub? Everyone know? Everyone knows. Yeah. So notice that Python notebooks are bad for Git-based development. So when you work in a team, it's common for you to develop something using Git, where you develop like one function in one branch, your teammate develops something else in another branch, and then you want to merge your results and to have some sort of history of your modifications. And with Jupyter notebooks, with the Python notebooks, it's very hard to do it. For example, if you run the same notebook, but with a different order of cells without changing the content of any of the cells, this would lead to actual change in the Git history. Yeah, so if you clone as a repository with this notebook and just run this cell, like again, yeah, so for example, oh, let's see here. So if I run this cell and then this cell, it's not the same Jupyter notebook as I run this cell and only then I run this cell. Because the number here in brackets changes. And GitHub will treat this as a modification. So your GitHub history, your differences between commits will be polluted by these small modifications of execution counts. If we change the code, the difference would look like this. They all look like strings, so it's maybe a bit harder for you to understand like whether this is a function or something else. And if we modify something like an image, like a matplotlib output, this would lead to a long sequence like this, which can sometimes have like 1,000 lines or something like this. And it just pollutes your Git diff. It says like, oh, you changed like 1,000 bytes, but actually just changed an image, and the only reason it is changed is because the only reason you have 1,000 bytes difference is because image is conserved as a byte sequence. And when you try to merge your notebook with a notebook of your teammate, for example, you just ran matplotlib twice and you got slightly different image, this would be treated as a difference, and your GitHub merge won't work properly. Yeah, you would need to manually try to understand, okay, how to merge it, what to change, etc. Clear? Is this comparison valid for educational purposes? You mean if you are studying, do you want to... So if you're studying and you are not developing anything with a team, you can work in a Jupyter notebook. Yeah, if your code is not large, if you have like one model, one training pipeline, you can use Jupyter notebook and it's going to be fine for you. But if for your educational project, you need to try different models or different setups. For example, at EPFL, there is a course about LLMs called Modern Natural Language Processing. And there you want to try different data sets, different learning rates. And you cannot do it in Jupyter Notebook because otherwise your code will look like hell. Probably with 1,000 error lines only in Jupyter. Yeah, so it's not in Jupyter, in IPython notebooks in general. So when you have IPython file, when you modify it, the problem like this with images occurs. Of course, it can occur if you just saved an image and you're uploading an image. The thing is, we are not uploading images often, but we want to update our notebook more often than just uploading an image. And we'll have a lot of trash differences like this one. Got it. Got it. Okay, so the last thing about IPython notebooks is that how I use GPU devices if I don't work in Jupyter. So how it connected if I work in VS Code. GPU device is not related to working in IPython notebook or working in VS Code working somewhere else. So to use GPU device, you just need to indicate whether you have like CUDA. If you have a GPU, you say CUDA, or CPU if you do not have a GPU. And you need to put your model on this device here. And your objects on this device here. So if you had the same code, I can show it to you here. Yeah, you would just do the same thing in your .py file. It's not related to working in Jupyter or not. Is PyCharm good? You recommend to use VS Code. So I work in VS Code usually, and my friends work in VS Code just because it's lighter and I think easier to use. But it's up to you. Like some people like PyCharm, some people like VS Code more. Some people like Vim. Yeah. Yeah, so the last thing I wanted to show you about Jupyter notebooks is, so let's restart our kernel and let's run our code, our training. So you see the progress bar is moving, and let me close the notebook. And now, once I close it, let me open it again. And let me try to run the first cell. You see that the first cell is trying to run, but it's not ending. Why? Because actually closing Jupyter Notebook doesn't mean that you closed its backend. You didn't kill the Jupyter Notebook kernel, so your code is still running. So actually, your code is still running here. The thing is, you do not see the progress bar, you do not see anything. Why? Because Jupyter Notebook doesn't update its state after you close it. So probably it would be better if we did this in WinDB case. Let me open it, the WinDB one, to just show it. Yeah, so I'm running my code, and it will be logging to WinDB. We can see it here. Yeah, it's still running. Now let me close this tab and open it again. So you see here that there is no progress bar, there is nothing, and it looks like the code stopped. But actually, if you look at WinDB here, we see that the plots are being updated. So the model is still running. It's still training, and it's going to continue training until it finishes. But here we won't see it. Yeah, we'll just see the star showing that something is in the process. And it's bad. So we lose control of the outputs of our cells once we close our Jupyter notebooks. The model will train, but we won't know it. Yeah, you see? So this yellow line has been updated, but we didn't see it. Okay, but I mean, Jupyter I use related Google GPU and I can't use it in VS Code. You mean when you work in Google Colab, you cannot use anything. You cannot like work with your VS Code field. I will show you that you can actually do it. You just push your code to GitHub, download it into your Google Colab Jupyter notebook, and run it there. And you can have access to Google Colab GPU from your project like .py based file system. So it's not a problem. Yeah. So why would we care about closing our Jupyter notebook? Why this is an issue in the first place? The issue is that usually you do not have a GPU on your laptop. Usually you rent a server, you buy a server, or your lab hosts a server, or your company hosts a server, and you connect to this server using SSH. Then what you do, let's no, it won't zoom out. No. So then you use something like TMUX, which allows you. So first of all, you connect via SSH, and if you close your terminal after SSH connection, the terminal will die. So if you just write like here Python and do print something like while true print something, and you close your SSH connection, this code will stop. So to avoid this, what people do, they use an utility called TMUX. It works like this, like TMUX new session, I guess. No. Minus S. For God's name. New. Let me. No. Shit. New minus S. Yeah. So, and you run your code here. Yeah, you do the same while true, something. And you close your terminal, but you can come back anytime, connect again, and it is still gonna be working. So actually, people open this Jupyter notebook, so their code inside these TMUX to ensure that they can close their own laptops, not the server, go have some food or do some other stuff, but their program will continue working. The problem with Jupyter notebooks is the one, like when you close your laptop, you come back, you do not know what is the output of your cells, as we saw. Jupyter notebook won't update, or Python notebooks won't update the cells once you close them. You'll see outdated cells, but the program will be running. Clear? Clear. Yeah, so to avoid these sort of issues, we would want to work in .py files instead. So this would solve problem number 3 because we won't have these issues with images, with cells, and it will be easier for us to merge files. It would solve Problem number 2, Y configuration, we'll talk about it a bit later. The code structure will be solved because we put our models in one file, our datasets in another file, our loss functions in the third file, and everything is separated by file or by subfiles. Like we create a directory where all the datasets are defined. And if you want to look at the datasets, we just go to the datasets directory. If we want to look at the losses, we go to the losses directory. So what is a Python project? And while using .py, we need just to leave terminal open. Isn't it the same thing as using? No, when you use a .py file, you just run your script inside terminal. Like let's mux new -s project. You do like Python 3 like run my script .py. You call it. And it will be running. You can close your SSH connection, everything. You come back and it's still going to be running. And you still going to see the output of this .py file. As we saw with example, with this while true print something. So we still saw that it was printing this word something. We still saw the output. Yeah, so when you reconnect, it's still there, and that's a good thing. You still see the outputs and they're updated. With Tmux, it's possible. With Tmux and .py files. With Tmux and IPython notebooks, it's not possible. So let's just have an understanding of how to develop this sort of project-based deep learning pipelines. Yeah, usually you have a directory. So we want to create something like this. Like we want to be able to import some data sets or some loss functions from some directory. So, for example, we do from Torch import nm. But Torch is actually, let's call it like a directory from which you can import some other directories, from each you can import some functions. So when I say directory here, it's the proper name is called package. And when we import some other subdirectories, like sub package. And we want to do something like this. Can we use a symbol with output redirection? Is it the same? Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. But so it will run the program in the background. Yeah. Then yeah, it's kind of the same thing. But with Tmux, I think it's easier because you have control, like you can kill your program anytime you want with just Control-C. You do not need to find this program ID, etc. Not program ID, but you understood. Yeah, so how to create something like from Torch import nm. So usually when we develop a project, we want to create a directory called like CRC or name of our project where we put all the files, all the code related to our project. So here, because the directory I already clicked it once, it exists, but you understood. So this would create a directory. This would create an empty file called init.py. So this empty file init.py is needed to show Python that this is not just a directory. This is a Python package. So if we do this, we would be able to call from CRC import something. So because I'm showing this in Jupyter Notebook, I'm using this special magic called write file, which allows me to write the whole cell into a file which I indicate here. So I create file crc somefuncs.py and I write this code inside it. Yeah, let's just see that it looks like this. Yeah. And now, like I created some functions in some funcs file. For example, one is text square, one defines the class, and I want to write a main script which I will be calling like this, like python3 main.py or python3 myscript.py, something like this. So inside this main.py, I can import functions from other files. Why? Because CRC is a package. It's a package because we included this init.py file, and because sunfuncs.py is located inside the same directory CRC. So if you want to get this mysquare function, we just call from crc.sunfuncs import mysquare or my number. And we can we can use these functions as we wish. Like my number x, we can, and it is gonna work. Let's just see. Yeah. So it prints the number and the squared version of it. And actually, instead of having one large main.py file, sorry, not large, but instead of having this main script as a .py file, one could actually use these files, these functions inside your Jupyter notebooks. So instead of having from CRC some funcs import inside main.py, we do it directly from the Jupyter notebook, and it still works. So this is useful when you want to test your code. For example, you created a data set, and instead of writing the whole script, running the whole script, you just do from CRC import my dataset and test whether it's working correctly or not. Or if you want to, for example, visualize the first object of your dataset, you will do something like this. But actually, maybe we do not want to write crc.sunfuncs all the time. Maybe we want to be able to directly do something like this from crc import mysquare. To do this, inside our init.py file, which was empty at the beginning, we need to do these imports here. So if these imports are inside this init.py, we won't need to do them ourselves anymore. So let's do it like this. And now instead of having from crc.sunfuncs, we can directly say from crc import stuff. And it's still gonna be working. And also you can create sub packages and do something like from crc some sub packages import some other function. For example, here you define your model. In sub packages, you define your layers, and inside your model, you load your layers from your sub package to again separate the structure to make it clear. Yeah. So notice that if main.py is located inside CRC and not outside, this is not gonna work. So Python 3 CRC main.py won't work. Ignore this. So this line of code won't work because Python wouldn't understand that like what is CRC. There are several options to fix this. Like one is to import sys and do sys.append file. You can Google what it does, but it's a bad way. So a simpler option would be to just call the same script in this way: Python 3 -m crc.main. We do not do .py, we just do crc.main, and it's gonna work. Clear? Any questions? No. Yeah. So you can put main.py inside of CRC. You can put main.py outside of CRC. So it can be like this, or it can be inside. But your main.py is your script that, for example, like so this is part of the code that runs your whole script, like your training or your inference of your deep learning model. It can be inside CRC, it can be outside, but if it's inside, you would need to run it like this. If it's outside, you just do it simpler, just Python 3 main.py. It shouldn't be main.py, it should be like some other name. It can be not main.py, but I love LauzHack.py. Yeah, and it's gonna work. So it's just the naming. So it's not necessarily like to call it main. So basically, this demonstrates how we can use IPython as long as with a normal Python code. Uh, so it includes this demonstration, but the goal is to inspire you. Yeah, to inspire you to start developing your code in .py files and to run your scripts outside of IPython notebooks. It's just here to show you how to actually create these .py files and how they work. I do it in the Python notebook. Like in a real development, I would do it in VS Code, where I would create like .py file like this for the data set, like this for the model. That would look something like this. Yeah, from crc.model, I import some stuff. Inside my model, I define my model, etc. Sometimes you have notebooks folder outside of CRC. How to tackle that? So there are two options. First one, you can make your project, you can install your project as a package, do something like pip install -e dot, and then you would be able to call it. But maybe it's not the best way if you're just using it like in several Jupyter notebooks. So then probably the only option for you is to do this at the beginning of your IPython notebooks, like pass to the CRC dir. Yeah, it will be like something like home user, blah, 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 my project, CRC, something like this. And then you'll be able to work with functions. No, it's added only for the execution of the notebook, only inside this notebook. It's not forever. So if you do it inside your IPython notebook, it will be used only for this IPython notebook. Okay. Yeah, so when it comes to deep learning, you want to separate your code based on its meaning. Like you want to separate data sets between each other. You want to separate loss functions. You want to separate loss functions from data sets, from models, from metrics. And in terms of code structure, you would end up with something like this. You have your CRC with a directory for data sets where you define your data set, where you define your another data set, some maybe utils, You do this init.py to make sure that this is a sub package. You may have another directory for losses, another directory for metrics, for models, for your training pipeline, where you define your train loop, like this optimizer.step, optimizer.zeroGrad, all this sort of stuff, and maybe some other code. And instead of having main.py, you would have something like train.py and inference.py. And actually, we have a template which is utilized by audio course at HSE and by the largest ML course at EPFL by Martin Yagi. So after this lesson, I suggest you to just go through the README and through the code. It's well documented, so it should be clear what it does. Everything explains. There are several tutorials explaining what it's doing, how to work with it. You can look at, for example, how to use this template to do image classifications that we did during the second day. Everything explained, like how to use, how to install. And when you go inside, you'll have like this file train.py, for example. And or when you open any other file, for each function, you would find this docstring, which would tell you what this function does, what is the first argument, what is the second argument, why we need them, what to put inside here. And one way of you to learn how this works is to start with train.py file and going step by step. Like, okay, this is our main script, we read this, and now we see set random seed function. And we do not know what it means. So we use control and let click of a button, and we go inside the definition of this function. And we can actually again read what it does and look at the code. Then we come back and we see, for example, this line. Okay, this is probably like understandable. Setup, saving, and logging. Yeah, again, it's not clear. Let's have a look what it means. Everything is explained. And you just look at the code. And you go step by step. You look like what is going on here, that this is our standard train loop where we run our model, we run our losses, we update our metrics, all this stuff. So we'll cover how configuration is handled here in a bit, but I just wanted to tell you that I think it would be a good thing for you to look at this template and to try working with it. And the first and simplest option for you to actually understand how it works is to go through this code, to look at all the cells and all the lines, all the docstrings, and then try to put day 2 seminar where we had our fully connected network with image classification inside this template. And once you've done this, you will be able to compare your solution with this example image classification branch and understand what you did correctly, what wrong, and how to fix this. And once you understand how the template works, once you implemented one example, it becomes extremely convenient for you. And you will be able to use it for any task, for any homework, for any project that you want. So can you drop the link to template, please? Yeah, thank you. So this is an example of how to write a good project. Yeah, but to understand it better and how it works, there is some extra text here. If you have time, we'll go through it. If not, you can go through it at home. So this notebook for today has a lot of text, which I basically like explain, but it's clear on its own. So yeah, I just wanted to tell you that, yeah, if you manage to do it here once, you will be able to do it many times, and it would make your life extremely easier. It saves like all the checkpoints, all the models for you, does logs inside WinDB, inside the Comet. You can add MLflow if you like it more. And if you, for example, want to change the model, you would be able to do it using command line. We'll explain it in a bit. Okay. Yeah. So let me explain. So what's going on with the models then? Any questions? No. Okay. So let's talk more about configuration. We already discussed that we probably want to change the learning rate or the architecture, but what else? So when creating a model for a task, we may want to try different setups, like different hyperparameters, like learning rates, batch sizes, hidden layer sizes, or different architectures, like we are working with the time series and maybe want to try RNN or a transformer, or different optimizer like ADAM or ADAMW, or different scheduler, or different laws, like during the lecture, we discussed MSE, but then we always used cross entropy. Maybe we should try both of them. Maybe we should use one of them, which one, or different data sets, or all of this combined. So actually, we want to try a lot of stuff. And let's look at the concrete example. So there is a paper called Pix2Pix. No, it's not called the Pix2Pix, it's called image-to-image translation, but the architecture is called Pix2Pix. And this is a single architecture that you can train to do several tasks. For example, you can take a photo of a map with everything like a natural photo, and then convert it into this like a Google Maps style view without colors. Or maybe you have a photo of a day and you want to convert it into a photo of a night of the same place. Or you have grayscale image and you want to convert it into RGB image. Stuff like this. So actually the same architecture can do all of this, but you see here that the tasks are a bit different. And you need to write pipeline to train your model for all of these tasks. So this pipeline would be pretty standard at the beginning. Yeah, you create a class for Pix2Pix in PyTorch, you create a dataset class for data pairs, like input-output, you choose a loss function, and then do standard training loop, like we saw it many times already. But now we want to train it to do like aerial to map or to do day to night. So we need to have two dataset classes, one for aerial to map and one for day to night. Yeah, and we are training the model from scratch. We do not want to have a universal model that can do both tasks at the same time. Yeah, we want to have one version of Pix2Pix that can do this and one version of Pix2Pix that can do this. Also, we may want to test different losses. For example, in the paper, they showed that if you use L1 loss, your output is not so good. If you use another loss called cgan, it will be better. But if you use two losses combined, it will be even better. So we have several experiments. We have different data sets. We have different loss functions. So actually, we have number of loss functions by number of data sets experiments, which is actually like how many? 6. So three loss functions, L1, cgan, and sum, and 2 data sets. So 6 different experiments. And what a junior engineer would do, he or she would create 6 different .py files. or even worse, 6 different cells in a Python notebook, as we discussed. With the only difference is this sort of line, like loss cgan loss or loss L1 loss, or dataset day to night or dataset area to map. So there will be exactly the same file with 1 or 2 lines of difference and a lot of copy paste. So this makes your structure look like trash. And also, if you modify one file because you found a bug, you would need to change all other files manually to fix the same bug, because like all your files are separated and just copy paste the versions of each other. So this is bad. You should never do it like this. So one way to handle it is to include configuration via argparse or click, which is an old school way. So this example is taken from an implementation of a famous paper for voice biometry. And basically, how it works, you call like import argparse, and you create parser where you add argument with the name, with the type like integer or float, with the default value, and with some explanation for you to remember what it means. That's how to do experiments is described in your project template. It's described how to like modify loss function, how to modify model, how to modify dataset. We'll also go through it today in a bit. Yeah. So, but project also explains this in the README, I guess, for the image classification example. Yeah. So the problem here is that this takes a lot of space in your .py file. So I only copy pasted, took a screenshot of like a part of this. But if you go here, you would see that actually there is much more. So it takes a lot of space, and the only way how they're separated is this small comment here and like one empty line here. So how this helps? The same file can handle different configurations by using if-else statements. Like if args.optimizer equal Adam, we can say, okay, let's use Adam optimizer. Or if our dataset is area to map, let's use area to map. Or if args dataset equal day to night, let's use day to night. So through if-else statements, we would be able to have the same .py file, but which can be configured through this argparse. And hyperparameters can be configured via args.aware or stuff like this. What's better, Hydra or argparse? So we are going into it. So yeah, and it's not mentioned here in the slides, but you can change it through the command line. So you would be able to write something like, let me add it here. Can be changed via command line, like python3 script.py, and let's say like seed equal to max epoch equal to. Yes, you could be able to run something like this to change these hyperparameters through command line, which is better than just having like just reading file config from JSON, in a sense, or from Jupyter notebooks, in a sense that if you want to change the learning rate, you do not need to modify the file with your config and upload it on GitHub and run it again. You can do everything through the command line, and you avoid having this problem with a lot of comments like update config with one line changes. However, there are some issues here with artparse. First one is that configuration is inside main script, which makes it dirty, as we saw. And different parts of config are separated by spaces and these comments. So everything is one extremely long file. And to handle different optimizers, losses, and models, we would need to use if-else statements. It's a better structured code with which also like makes it longer and harder to read. So one way to solve this, and what, for example, Hugging Face does, is to write some custom loaders and custom codes. So instead of having this configuration inside main script, you create JSON files or YAML files and create special functions that load these JSON files and combine them with artparse via custom wrappers that you again have to write. Can we just put parse in a separate file and add it as a library or something? So potentially you could do it. Still, it's not possible to load configs from file without special loaders. And if you try to separate artparse based on like write some custom code to separate like some part for the data loader, some part for configuring datasets, some part for configuring like models, you in a way try to write custom wrappers. What I'm trying to say is that you can make artparse work well, but there is too much hassle to do it, which is unnecessary. Yeah, for example, to separate files, you can write data classes to one data class for training, one data class for like data sets. That's also what Hugging Face does, and just use custom functions to merge this with artparse. And maybe the largest problem is that if you want to load to instantiate your object, like your model, your data set, based on the configuration, you would need to write a special function that would load this object given a string name. For example, if you worked with Hugging Face, you probably saw they have this class like after transformer or after sequence model, something like this, where you give the name and they load the model automatically. But this is a wrapper. And you would need to write something like this to instantiate your models if you want to just say like this, like, oh, your data sets, you would need to write custom code to make it work like dataset equal custom function args.dataset to make it in one line instead of this if else. So this is okay. Like it's definitely better than the first option, but it could be better. And the way to make it better is to use Hydra. So this is one line in the script to handle all configuration. And you can easily separate configs from .py files. And you can easily instantiate objects directly from the config. You can separate configs based on their idea, like separate configs for your models, separate configs for your datasets, separate configs for your loss functions, etc. And one thing that my friend Eric likes is that you can have a boilerplate code for saving outputs, but for me personally, I don't like it. I prefer to save everything myself, but yeah, it's doable. So main issue is if else stuff, hard to separate parse args and add them from the file. So the main issue is, yes, if else stuff, that is hard to separate parse args and load configuration from files. Yes, that's the main issue. With Hydra, it's much easier. So instead of having this long list inside our .py, we just have a single line of code here. Hydra.main over our main script, and config path shows the path to the directory with configs, and the default config, which is defined here by showing config name. How the configuration file looks like. So it's like JSON, but YAML, so the formatting is a bit different. You say the name of your argument, like seed or maybe learning rate, then 2 dots and space and the value, which can be either a string, a list, a dictionary, many different options. Yeah, and if you want to use Hydra idea of saving outputs, you can also add this and configure Hydra itself, but me personally, I am not doing this usually. Where we need to use content manager Hydra. So inside your main script that you run, like if for example, you have a script like this, train.py, and you do like Python 3, if you do something like Python 3 train.py, you need to put this Hydra main here. On top of your function, which you call in your script. So at the beginning of your main script. So I use it only once in the main script. Yes, you use it only once in the main script, and that's yeah. So if you have another script, like for example, not train py but inference py, you would need another Hydra main because inference py has nothing to do with train.py. Like it's a separate screen, like a separate script. But yeah, so you run it, you add it into your main file, which runs all your training or all your inference. So the thing is that you actually want to configure. Yeah, so instead of having this, in your VS Code program, after every function, you write args. So this is a doc string where I try to explain. So when you write code, you either have like params, and you write like what is given to the function, or args. There are different styles, like one args and returns, one params and returns. Just follow one standard code style of docstring and use it here. But it's a good practice to write docstrings for your functions, where you start with explaining what this function does, then you add something like args and explain what is the first argument. So model is of the following type, and this is something. Config is of the following type, and this is something. Skip model load is bool, and this is what it does. So all the arguments that we wrote in Hydra file are in config. We should just use the class object with necessary fields. Yes. So if you look example for the here, we have like one optimizer, one learning rate scheduler, one loss function, and Hydra config will be like a dictionary of dictionaries, something like this. So when we say config.trainer, we get this dictionary. When we say config.trainer.logstep, we get this one. Yeah, so before we had signal type. So if we did something with argparse, we would have something like this. If signal type equal this, signal equal numpy array, else if signal type equals this, let's do this. Now we have one line which we say signal equal instantiate and config.signal, which is this string, like numpy array or custom array. And we can also add some other arguments if you want to, for example, the length of the signal, which we separate from the main config. Yeah, so how it works? Inside your config, you would need to write underscore target underscore. This tells Hydra use this class with the following arguments, if you give any, or with some arguments, to initialize this class. Let's look at the example. 1 second, do I have anything here? Yeah, so you can look at the code here. You can scan the QR code, or you can use the link. Yeah, I think like you looked at it. So where is here? It's here. Alternatives, examples. So imagine we have a script that we called real_convolve.py. We add this hydra.main here, and we say that default configuration path is configs. So real config is located here. Configs is the directory next to it. So Hydra would know that, okay, all the configs are located here in configs.py. But need to make it a bit larger. Yeah. So all configs are located here, and Hydra would know it. And we say, what is the default one? So default one, we say, okay, use this one as the default configuration file. And now what's happening, like we fix the seed, we fix something, and we create a signal. To do so, we import instantiate function from hydra.utils. This will tell Python to look at underscore target underscore inside config.signal and use this target as a class. So basically, this would do something like this. Underscore target underscore, and then it will use these following arguments as ordered arguments. So it will be like this, config signal len. And if there are any other arguments, it will use them as keyword arguments like this. So instantiate config signal len would be replaced by this line here. And if our target is, for example, np.random.rand, let's look here. This would call this function to create our signal. If it's some custom class that we created, like example custom, it would create this object with these keyword arguments passed inside. So let's look example custom. Has numpy method defined as a string and some transform. So let's try to run this code. We do Python 3 real_convolve. And we see our signal, which looks like random noise. And indeed, it looks like random because we go here and see that the default value for the signal is taken from this example NumPy. So I didn't explain this, so it's maybe not clear. So when you define your main config, you can say what is the default value. And for some objects, you could do, so you have like two options how you can write this config. You can say signal and then write target here, or you could create a directory named signal and tell your default config inside your defaults to, if I want to use signal, take the configuration from the file named like this inside this signal directory. So we say that for, by default, let's use the configuration called example was NumPy by default, example NumPy. So by default, let's call example NumPy, and it will look what is inside here and put it in place of signal. Yeah. So basically, this code is equivalent to this code. Is it clear? So with Hydra, you can use configs from different folders and use these folder names as a keyword for your object. Why it's useful? Because now I can change default signal via command line just by giving a name. So remember we have example NumPy and example custom. So I can say signal equal example custom, and it would replace the whole configuration of signal with the configuration I define here, which it takes from another configuration file. And you see that we can have now a different signal which goes from 0 to like 1000. Also, we saw here that for example custom, there is a field named transform, which is none by default and which is not represented here in any way. What we could do, we could say, let's add it and let's use configuration from a subdirectory called transform. So we have a subdirectory here with transform, where you again define some transform via target and its arguments. And if you run this code, we would see that again our transform is working, and now we see squared values instead of non-squared values. So we have the main config and signal example custom transport all arguments to main config. Yeah. So via command line, we can change the values of our main configuration. So we can say, let's look what we have here. We have signal len, seed, and filter len. Maybe I want to change the seed. So I say seed equal 1. And maybe I also want to change the signal length and make it 10 instead of, or let's say 100 instead of 1000. And indeed, it now creates an array of 100 instead of 1000. Or maybe I want to change signal to example custom. And then I also want to change the signal length. All working. Or you remember that example custom has this NumPy method thing here. So let's say signal.numpy method and use, for example, zeros. And we see that our signal is 0 now. So we can override even fields that were inside this custom config. Could you repeat how do we pass an arguments to target and code? And what do we do if different targets accept different numbers and types of arguments? So you have two options how to instantiate an object. First one is you define target inside your config, and then you define all arguments by keywords, like numpy method equals something, transform, for example, equal something else. And notice that this numpy method works for example custom object, but it doesn't work for example numpy object. Because example numpy is a numpy object, it doesn't have this special field example numpy method. So they still have different types of arguments. But why the code doesn't care about it? Because all these things from the config file will be passed as keyword arguments like this. Oh, not signal then, signal. Config signal. So they will be passed as keyword arguments. If there is a key numpy method, it will be used here. If it doesn't exist, it won't be used here. If you want to use some arguments that are used by different targets and that we want to pass as like ordered arguments, not keyword arguments, we can add them like this. So here, for example, config signal length is arguments that all of the objects of the types of objects have. Why do we need example custom? Example custom is just an example. So I just wanted to show you that we can change, we can have different configs and apply like transforms for example custom, for example. Yeah, if you look at, yeah, and of course you can change, yeah, I didn't say one thing. So you're probably wondering what is self here. So if self is located here at the beginning, this would mean to Hydra, please look at this code below and then replace anything with what is located here. If the order is opposite, it says, let's use this configuration first and then replace some stuff here. For example, I can say example custom, and here I can use signal numpy method equal zeros, and it would work again. Yeah. So if self is located below, this means that these options would override the ones written here. Clear? Yeah, so if you go to the project with deep learning case, we would have, for example, one stuff like this with target for the data set. We also pass transforms here. Or for the model, we say, okay, let's use this model. And if we had another model, we would just have like model number 2. Well, let's say it would have like different configuration. And the good thing is that inside, so we could just say python train.py model equal model 2, and it would run the same script with model 2 instead of baseline. Or baseline, yeah. Or if you have model 3, we can say model 3. So we can change the way of which model, which data set we use just through the command line. Like data set equal something else. If you want to change learning rate, which is located here, we can say optimizer.learning rate. So optimizer.learning rate equal 1e minus 5. Something like this. Why we need different parameters in default like signal self? So here, in order to instantiate an object through Hydra, to pass it like this, like instantiate config.signal, we need to define what is signal. One way of doing it is to directly write signal configuration here, or we can use it inside default and say, for signal, take the configuration from the folder named example custom. Self is just a way to tell Hydra to ensure to use things written here after reading this stuff. If we put self above, it would at first use this configuration and then utilize the configuration located here. Clear? So create only main config and put all args in main config. Yeah, so like you could do something like this. You can remove defaults and you could say signal target numpy.random.random. And in order to use this config, you would do something like this, config pass. No, I guess like this. Config dir, config pass. How do you call it? Main. Config name, sorry, not config pack or config name. Yeah, you see, so I changed the config, I didn't write any defaults, but the value is np.random.rand. Yeah, and as you said, yeah, as I mentioned randomly that, yeah, you can change the config name so you can create different big configs and use one config, use another config by just indicating config name equals something. Okay. Yeah, good. Yeah, and in this thing, yeah, you would have, for example, one main config for baseline, but you could have another like for final config for your final model after you trained it with, and you defined your final setup, you can create your final config here and not a baseline config, for example. But notice that here again, optimizer is used. You can change optimizer directly from command line by just change the target. So you would do something like Python 3 train.py optimizer target equal torch.optim.sgd, for example. And you could again do it from command line, or you could create a subfolder and use a subfolder for it. Okay. Yeah, so we are out of time, and it's up to you whether we're gonna cover reproducibility or we are gonna ignore it. Just tell me. So if you're tired, we can finish on this, cover the most important stuff, or we can spend like 10 more minutes or 15 more minutes to cover reproducibility. Let's cover, we can continue. Okay. Yeah. So imagine you're implementing a paper or a model called supermodel from a paper called like supermodel, the best model ever, that you found on Archive or somewhere else. You train your model and you see that the results are different from those reported in the paper. Like they showed the accuracy 99.99 and you got like 98 or 97, for example. So what has gone wrong? What are your thoughts? What are your ideas? What could be wrong? Yeah, so like uh, as many would may suggest, yes, like model was not updated, or the offers align. So yeah, there are some basic options that what could go what could gone wrong. So the first one is obviously you made a bug in your code and something is wrong because of that. Yeah, maybe you train models on different data sets, like, or yeah, that you didn't use the full configuration of what the offers did. Yeah, you used another data set or something else. So this, of course, could be also a valid option. Yeah, but the basic one is just some bug in your code or wrong configuration, or offers configuration is actually a bit different from what reported in the paper. For example, there is a famous paper about hi-fi GAN, and they include one hyperparameters inside their appendix and other hyperparameters inside their code. So it's a known issue. But the paper is great. But yeah, just to mention as an example, so it can occur sometimes. But it's fine if they have an open source code where they actually show the real hyperparameters. It's bad if the hyperparameters are different as there is no open source code. Yeah. So authors did a mistake in their code. I also had this problem once. So there was a paper where authors said that theoretically this should improve the model because it like does something and something, and let's like implement this idea, and we see that it performs well. But actually, when we look at their code, it occurs that the training pipeline was doing exactly the opposite thing. They were saying like that the stuff should like increase to get better, but the code was doing decreasing. So the actually decreased the thing. And when we fixed the code to match the paper, it actually didn't work. So sometimes this can also occur. And if authors have not disclosed all the important information fully in the paper, you need to guess. Yeah, sometimes, for example, they didn't include the learning rate, and you need to figure out what was the learning rate. Or they didn't include the loss function, you need to figure out what was the loss function. Something like this. So, of course, you may blame yourself or may blame authors, but there are some other stuff. So let's say authors put code on GitHub and still the results differ. So what is wrong? Yeah, Leonid already knows the answer, but so maybe let's keep the question and say that, yeah, there are some other stuff related to the differences in the environment. What it means? First of all, it means the random seed can be different. So when we train our models from a random starting position, we take this random position from a random generator that uses some random seed. And when we do it with different seeds, we end up with different starting positions, and this could affect the quality dramatically. For example, there is a paper about audio anti-spoofing, defect detection, And they actually showed that depending on the random seed, the quality can be like 3 times worse. So for example, here the quality is 4.26 and here it's 14.80. So it's 3 times worse than with the best seeds they had. And it's not only about audio anti-spoofing, it can happen for other tasks too. That's why also a good idea to report STD with different random seeds in your paper, if possible. So solution to fix it is to fix the random seed via this function where you fix it for torch, you fix it for numpy, you fix it for random, you fix it for the pattern itself. And you also need to think about random algorithms that PyTorch does. So first of all, PyTorch may use non-deterministic operations for convolutions and for some other layers because they're faster. So you need to enable deterministic to ensure that all algorithms are deterministic. And also PyTorch may look at the shapes of your input and use optimized algorithms based on this shape. And to avoid this, you need to call torch.backends.cuDNN.benchmark equal false. However, notice that doing this would potentially mean that your code is much slower, though it's much more reproducible than before. So you're less under the risk of having different results with different starting positions. It is especially bad when you fixed everything, you achieved the best model ever you had, but you cannot get the same model yourself because you didn't fix all the randomness you had. Another thing that may have an impact is the library version. So the update may break the code or change its behavior. For example, there is an audio library called Librosa, and before you could define arguments as you wanted to. You can pass them with keyword arguments, as ordered arguments, everything worked. Yeah, for example, male spectrum array and this number worked in 0.7.0. But in modern version, which is 0.11.0, the function looks like this. And because of this little star here, actually doing male spectrum array 16,000 would lead to an error, to a runtime error, saying that you cannot use non-keyword based arguments. So this could break your code easily. Secondly, the default behavior or just behavior of the code could change. PyTorch, for example, had a slightly different implementation of Adam and AddleW in the past in comparison to the modern version. So before, update in Adam was calculated like this. So epsilon was multiplied by a coefficient, and now it's not multiplied by a coefficient. The difference may seem small, but still it's some difference. And that could lead to slightly or significantly different results. And in some updates, new methods are introduced, like from PyTorch 2.0, Torch compile was introduced, which makes your model training and model inference much faster, but you cannot run this command if you are under this version. So you need to always fix your requirements for your project with correct versions. Like you should indicate that Torch should be of this specific version or higher maybe, or exactly this one. For some libraries, maybe you do not care that much, but it would be a good practice to care for all of them. Yeah, especially be careful with saying more or less, more equal, because, for example, if you avoid indicating numpy equal 1 to 1.26 here, your pip will try to install Torch 2.2 and numpy 2 plus, and these are not compatible with each other. So NumPy 2 plus doesn't work with PyTorch less or equal 2.2, and you will have you will have incorrect versions, and your code won't work. So be careful with that. However, what if we need one library version for our project 1 and another for project 2? Or what if different libraries require different versions of other libraries? Yeah, like we have our own app, and this requires request 2.3.1 and this 2.5.2. What should we do? So if we are using someone else app, someone else library, and they have conflicting dependencies, this is probably non-solvable. But for us as developers, if we are developing something, we want to make sure that things like this won't happen. So if bar client and full client are both our own apps, we would want to fix them to use the same version of requests. To do so, and to also ensure that if we are working on project 1 and project 2, which require different libraries, we have different versions, we can create virtual environment. Can we use Docker for this? We'll see. So we can create virtual environment, isolated version of Python and its packages. So there are two ways how you can do it. Actually, there are more, but basic ones. First one is via virtualenv. We just install a package called virtualenv and do Python 3 -m venv project env. And then we activate this environment, which has its own Python, where we can install all the packages, and they will be isolated from the system packages that we use. However, this doesn't allow us to choose the Python version. This would require us to use the thing called pyenv. Why we need to do this? Can you repeat, please? So imagine in one project you use librosa 0.70 and another you use 0.11. You cannot have both versions inside your environment inside your Python environment. You can either have 11 or 7, but you want to use the same Python to run project number 1 and project number 2. You cannot do this. So instead, we say, let's create one Python to run project 1 and another Python to run project 2. So Python for project 1 can use librosa 11, and Python for project 2 can use librosa 7. Is it clear now? Yes. Yeah. So another way of doing it instead of virtualenv is to use conda, anaconda, or miniconda. Miniconda is probably easier to use. And with miniconda, we'll be able to fix one other issue, which is system packages. So notice that even Python itself is your system package, and it can alternate or break the performance. For example, in Python 3.11, you have a different way of definition of data classes, and some libraries like FairCQ, they do not work on Python 3.11. They return this error just because it's a new Python with updated behavior. So maybe if you want to use FairCQ, you want to use another version of Python. But it's not only about Python, it's about other libraries too. For example, PyTorch uses C++, and C++ is defined via like just GNU packages, I guess, or some other packages. And their versions can also lead to slightly different performance. For example, in this Red Hat Linux, in the version number 7 and version number 8, the implementation of exponential 2f led to slightly different floating points results. That would also alternate your outputs of your model a bit. So Conda, in contrast to virtualenv, allows you to install different versions of system packages for virtual environments. So you can install Python of specific version, you can install GNU of specific version, and all other packages. One useful example when it's helpful, for example, you're using like a server and it has very old version of like OpenSSL, and your host, like your company like security or someone else, doesn't allow you to update this OpenSSL server-wise. So, but you need this OpenSSL updated for your programs. So what you do, you install OpenSSL inside Conda, and you can install any version you want. And with this any version you want installed, you're not modifying server packages, so the security guys are not shouting on you, but everything is working now. However, if you do not install a system package, so for some system package, it will use your systems package by default. So meaning that there might be some differences between the behavior on your computer and other computers, because there is a small system package that you didn't think about that actually alternates your performance a bit. So one way to ensure that all system packages are the same is to use Docker. That creates isolated system with fixed system and Python packages. The only thing that is different, that is still like not fixed inside the Docker, is the low-level code of kernel, and the only way of fixing this is to use not container machines like Docker, but virtual machines, which is much more complicated and harder. So people usually, when they think about reproducibility, they stop on Docker. Like this is the best thing we can do until like for currently at the moment. So there was a question. This is a way how download all requirements to make project independent to all new libraries. Yeah, basically when we use Conda or Docker, so when we use Docker, we isolate our environment completely from our system and from Python or system packages. So this is the best way of isolating everything and making it independent. For Conda, we can, like if you probably saw it here on the left. So I have, for example, one Conda environment. Activate for like some of my projects. If I want to use another one, I can use another one which I have here, or if I need a completely new one with completely new version of packages, I would create a new one and use it instead. So how Docker solve problem with libros 0, 7 and 11? So inside your Docker, you install specific versions of system packages and Python packages. And they use one Docker for project number 1 and another Docker for project number 2. Yeah, you'll have 2 containers. Clear. However, this is not all in terms of what can be different, because we fixed system differences as much as we could, but we still have a hardware issue. Like if this is my computer and this is your computer, you probably calculate stuff faster and better than me because I am outdated. A more concrete example is that older NVIDIA GPUs have different default floating points. For example, modern RTX 330 plus GPUs use TensorFloat 32 by default for floating point calculations, while older versions use float 32 by default. There are some mixed precision or half precision floating points like BF16 or FP16, and they do not work on all GPUs. For example, if you have old 1080 GPU, you cannot use BF16 because it's not supported by this hardware. So if your code uses BF16, it just won't work on this old GPU. So the last thing you need to also consider in terms of reproducibility is what hardware do you use. That's why in papers, in research papers, usually it's a nice thing to do to indicate what GPUs you use to train your model, to make your paper more reproducible. Yeah, so that's basically it for what I wanted to cover today. And if you have any questions, let me know. If not, yeah, question. I have a question. Let's wait. If you put in Docker our model and project, what the GPUs will be used. So if your project with your model is inside Docker, it will use the same hardware as your system. So you can use like if you have like two GPUs, you can use any of them inside Docker. The only problem that I think may exist is multi-GPU training doesn't work well on inside Docker, or at least maybe I just don't know how to make it work. Well, when I tried to work with multiple GPUs inside Docker, it didn't work for some reason. But other than that, you use just the same hardware as your system. So if you go into GitHub and download container, you will have the same system and Python packages as they did, but you will have your own hardware that runs it. And this may lead to slightly different results. But these hardware-based results, hardware differences are not so strong as system differences. So, and they are much easier to fix in the sense that like many modern like servers, they use the same 800 or H100 or V100 GPU type of GPU.